Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you might be. Thank you for joining us again for another stream, another workshop, in fact. How are you, Rebecca?
I'm good. Doing great. Enjoying my first day back of the week.
Yes, it's Monday. It's a glorious day out there. Apparently,
Monday.
it was supposed to be snow. Believe it or not, in Seattle, we're supposed to have snow.
Oh, really? Yeah,
Yes.
it dropped down. We had that nice warm week, such a tease, and now
Hmm.
it's back down to the cold.
Well, that was spring for you. Now we have to wait for summer. One more week.
Yeah, one more week. It always, my birthday's this month for spring, and it always has
Oh.
been, the last few years it's been snowing. So I'm like, I think we need to change spring to April.
I
Just
hope
saying.
we can break the habit and have a proper spring holiday, right?
Yeah, that's actually a better outlook.
Yes.
I'm like, let's just push it back.
Right. Do you want to do the intro?
Sure. So, Chris has already said thanks for joining us, but I'll just reiterate thank you all for tuning in for a special collab 425 show. Me, it's Microsoft Reactor. So, we're happy to have Christos um, tuning in and doing an identity series for the Reactor. If you're not familiar, I mean, you're coming in live from his 425 link, but he hosts the 425 show on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christos. 10
Tuesdays and
a.m. now?
Fridays.
Tuesdays and Fridays.
Yep.
Okay.
8 a.m. Pacific, 11 Eastern.
11 Eastern. Okay, great. He's an identity advocate for the Microsoft Identity Division. So if this topic is of interest to you and you want to explore further, definitely check out their show. We'll be sharing the link in the comments. Today, we'll be jumping in where we last left off. If you tuned in last time, we covered the first section of the Implementing Microsoft Identity track from Microsoft Learn site. I'll drop the link for that learning course in the comments as well if you want to follow along, and we'll be starting with the second module. This session should run for approximately 2 hours with time for questions throughout. We'll see how far we get. We might end up getting into another module as well, so we'll just see how the pace goes. If this is your first time joining us, just note that this session is recorded and we are streaming it both to Twitch and to YouTube. You can leave questions, comments in the chat, and we'll make sure we respond to those. And then at the conclusion of the session, I'll drop a feedback survey link in the chat if you have the time. We appreciate if you fill that out. And now over to you, Christos.
Sweet. Thank you for the awesome intro, and we're looking forward to this one. And hopefully, you're looking forward to write some code this morning with me and learn how to use Microsoft Identity with the different application styles and types. So let me transition to the next one. So everybody should be now seeing my browser. And I've dropped the link for today's session on the chat. I've dropped it both on YouTube and on Twitch. So wherever you are, you should be able to open it up and follow along. So for the first module, we covered the general information about getting started with Microsoft Identity, setting up your tenant, and getting everything working. Today, we're going to look into how we can use Microsoft Identity with different application types. In fact, yesterday I was streaming with a friend of ours on Twitch using React with Node.js and securing it all with Passport and Amsel. So it was a fun stream getting it all up and running. And today we're going to learn how to get started with different types of applications. When we talk to developers, we always like to explain that Microsoft Identity works with most of the application types out there. So I'm going to jump to the introduction. We enable developers to write applications or secure applications no matter the platform, no matter the language. That means that we don't really care whether you're developing in .NET or JavaScript or Java or Python. In fact, we welcome all the languages. And then we also don't care whether you're running your application on premises, on the cloud, our cloud, somebody else's cloud. The whole point is that we prefer that you use a federated identity system to secure your applications no matter where you're running. And today we're going to look into some familiar and maybe some not so familiar technologies and see how Amsel fits in there. So for the prerequisites, basic knowledge of OAuth authentication flows, probably yes or no. I mean, we're going to explain something, so I don't think that you need to have knowledge of OAuth and standards. If we can avoid talking about the internals of certain things, I think it's easier for developers to get started. Ability to develop in Asp Net Core, I would say beginner level is fine. We're going to use the .NET CLI to build most of the things. If you don't have .NET installed, we'll quickly walk you through the process. We also need some ability to develop with JavaScript, some basic JavaScript understanding. Again, I don't know why they put intermediate level there, because we're just copy pasting code. And I will be explaining what its code component does. So even if you don't understand JavaScript fully, we can do that. And then Visual Studio Code at the beginner level. So as long as you have these three things, components, these three things installed, then we're good to go. If you don't have them installed, then you can acquire VS Code, Visual Studio Code, download, just search for that. Load, I can't type this morning. You should see here, download the one that you like to use for your own machine. If you don't have .NET, just .NET, .NET, I think, .NET. If that's not confusing, then I don't know what it is. So .NET, and then you can hit the download button and then find the one for your system. So it doesn't have to be Windows. You can follow along on Linux and Mac OS if you wish so. And then finally, Node.js, mainly to run our Node application. So jump on Node, select the LTS, please, not the current. I know that some people like to live dangerously and get the latest and greatest, but LTS is probably the recommended one here. So let's go with 14.16. So hopefully you have everything you need out to get started. And for the first one will be, for this session, we will be comparing the flows, or how can you authenticate in different types of applications. So let's go to single page apps. That's the next step. So application types refers to the different authentication flows, right? Well, I'm responding to Rasgov's comments. Yes and no. I think it's a little bit confusing and overinflated, but application types are single page apps, server type apps, console apps, or headless applications, or daemons, or whatever you want to call them. The flows don't really match, so there's no console flow, right? There's client credential flow, or there's authorization flow or implicit flow. However, different application types have different flows. So you can't do authorization code flow on a console app because there's no interaction. I mean, technically you can have interaction if you want to, but it's not recommended considering that most of the console apps are written to run headless, as in it's a task running somewhere behind the scenes. So different flows and different application types. And usually there's a kind of a one-to-one mapping, and that's what we'll be discussing today. So I don't know how many people here use single page applications. I don't know if you've ever written any single page apps, but the whole point here is that based on the evolution of JavaScript and the browsers, now we have the ability to create client-side applications, like code that runs only on the browser rather than having a server component driving the experience. And there are different frameworks out there. You can start with Angular or Vue or React or what was the other one? There are plenty of frameworks out there, and I think in the JavaScript world there's a new framework every single day. So the three bigger ones are Angular, Vue, and React, and they all support the OAuth 2.0 flow. Now there's implicit flow, and up until this point we were stuck with implicit flow, which meant that our applications were not as secure, considering that the code and the cookies and the tokens were passed back to the browser in the URL, which meant that people could intercept that information and use it for malicious reasons. And because that's been such a pain for creating secure single-page applications, the protocol has evolved now to support authorization code flow with PXE. I know that we're talking about flows right now and it might sound confusing, so I will put it simply. Implicit flow is the old insecure way of doing authentication, and authorization code with PKC, it's a proof key for code exchange, the PKC, if you're wondering what it means. It's also pronounced PXE, So when I first heard about it, I was looking for PIXIE. I was like, there's no PIXIE in authorization. But anyway, it's PKCE, and it stands for Proof Key Code Exchange. In effect, it's a protocol that allows you to exchange codes without compromising any security. So we took away the onus of forcing developers to think about how they can secure their applications. So now single-page apps can be secure, and equally as secure are server-side applications. If you are very new to the identity ecosystem, and if you're very new to the Microsoft Identity platform, then the good news is that we provide you with libraries out of the box that allow you to integrate with your application without you having to have intimate knowledge about what happens behind the scenes, how the codes are exchanged, how you acquire your tokens, and what have you. A few lines of code and off you go. So the Amsel library, the Microsoft Authentication library, is the latest and greatest iteration of our libraries. If you have ever, this is a side note, but if you ever wrote any applications that use ADAL, which is our older library, please reach out to us. That library is going to be deprecated as of June 30th, 2022. So you have about a year and 3 months to go and update your applications because ADAL will not be supported anymore. So you'll be liable to security issues. So if you are using ADAL or if you ever used ADAL, the old library, reach out to us. But now we're new, we have the latest stuff. Let's go with Amsel. So Amsel 2.0 is the one that supposedly supports the latest PIXIE stuff that we talked earlier on, and it allows us to write secure applications. It doesn't mean that it's the only library that you can use. In fact, yesterday we were using Passport with our friend as we're doing the stream. So open source libraries that support OAuth and OpenID Connect can also be used to build. But for this workshop, we're going to focus on Amsel because it's the recommended way if you're using our library or if you're using our platform. So the first thing that you have to do is create an app registration. And we will go through that as we move to the next workshop. But there are two main components when you're building an authentication system with the Microsoft Identity platform. In fact, with any identity provider, like if you're using Google directly or if you're using Facebook or you want to use Twitter for authentication, you actually have to go and create an app registration. They might have different names on each platform, but at Microsoft, on the Microsoft Identity platform, we call them an app registration. And this actually shows your intent that you are going to use the platform to authenticate. It says to Azure Active Directory that I'm going to use you for providing user sign in and sign out and maybe accessing tokens. So we start with the app registration, and you can see here that the platform actually makes it easier to show your intent. So when you say, I want to add an authentication here, platform here, it opens up this nice window and says, what kind of application are you going to do? So these are the different application types that we talked about. You see, it doesn't talk about flows here at all, so it's nice. And since we're doing single page apps for this one, we'll be selecting single page app as we go through the workshop. Then we need to provide a redirect URI. This redirect URI in effect says that anytime that somebody logs in to this specific app registration on Azure AD, I want you to send my tokens back to this specific URL. And this means that there's only one application that can accept these tokens back. And that also secures your application from being hijacked. So, if somebody tries to sign in and then they want to send the tokens to a different place, they can't do that because they don't own that URL. Important note here, you can only use HTTP with localhost, i.e. for testing. If you are going to push your application to production, hopefully you're not running on HTTP localhost, you're running on HTTPS some domain. So just a side note, if you ever try to do HTTP with your domain name, it's not going to work, and hopefully you're not using HTTP domains anymore. So code configuration, you just need to reference the Amsel browser.js. However, again, a side note, if you are using Angular or React, we have Angular and React components directly for you. So there's an Amsel library or an extension or a specific Amsel for Angular and a specific Amsel for React, which makes your life a lot easier so you don't have to wrap and create components for Amsel. But they're all built on top of Amsel browser. And the Amsel browser is the one that we use for vanilla JavaScript applications or anything that you want to directly call with Amsel. There is a bit of configuration. So this configuration indicates what are we going to use to authenticate. And in effect, remember, we register the app inside Azure AD, and now in here, in the auth component under Amsel config, we're telling our our application or our code that it needs to go to that specific application that we just registered, and it needs to use that specific Azure AD tenant, the tenant that we have and we own, so that we can go and sign in our users. And then finally, this redirect URI needs to match this redirect URI so that we can take our tokens back and be able to get the authentication result and do something with it. If they don't match, you're going to get some error messages. Some additional configuration settings here, which may or may not interest you. The cache location, so once you get a token, where is it going to be stored? Depending on where you store it, you can enable single sign-on. So if I sign into one tab in my browser, if I open another tab, then I can have that automatically signed in rather than having to do it myself or have to re-authenticate for every single app. And then store auth state in cookie. Again, this is a configuration that you can set up. And finally, the Amsel application, this is where we instantiate our client. And you can see it's a public client, so it's not a confidential client, it's not a secure client. Everybody can have access. It's in the name. It's a public client. Everybody can access that. Mobile apps, client-side apps, anything that the developers or anyone can maliciously go and start messing around with your code. Can they reverse engineer stuff? Do you have secrets in there? That's why we say a public client. And then there are very few lines of code that you actually need to implement to log in users and get tokens. So you can see here, there's a login pop-up method. There's also a login redirect if you want to redirect the users rather than presenting a pop-up. And what it does is it tries to sign in. The user will be presented with a pop-up that will have to enter their credentials. And then once you get your response back, you can do something with it, like present the username on the screen or change the UI. And that will be the exercise that we'll do in a very few seconds. So it says here, the preferred experience when using Amsel when signing in to obtain tokens is to use a pop-up window. See, we say. Some browsers have known issues with pop-up windows. In these cases, you can choose the Amsel equivalent method, which is a browser redirect. We support both. And once you sign in your users, you may want to get some tokens. So you have the ID token that came with your user sign-in. So now we know who the user is, but we might want to present the user with some options about what they can do within our application. And for that, we need to acquire an access token. So the access token is, I need to go and get a token so I can call another API, or I can call Graph, or I can call my other protected API from the system. So this is optional. So this is not user sign-in. This is allowing the user to acquire access to other resources in our application. In this instance, because we love to talk about Graph, we have an example where we acquire a token for Graph to go and read my email. Or your email, sorry, not my email. You're not going to be calling my email. You could if you were in the same org and you had the right permissions, but within Microsoft, we don't really allow people to go and poke into other people's emails. So here we try to acquire the token, and once we get the token, if there's a token in the cast, then perfect. If there's no token in the cast, then we need to present a pop-up. And usually the first time that you do it, you're not going to have an access token in the cache, and therefore you're going to be presented with another pop-up saying, do you consent as a user to give this application rights to go and look into your email? And this is based on consent. So if you say no, then the application won't be able to proceed. So that protects you as a user, protects developers as well from getting too much access to data that they shouldn't have to. And then finally here, we are using some code to call directly to the Graph API. So now that we have our access token, we need to pass it on the header. So you notice down here, we have a request header, passing the authorization. So Graph is expecting an access token. And once you pass the access token, you get the results back and off you go. So now that we talked about how we're doing it, let's go and actually do it. So if you follow along, just press continue, and the first thing we're going to do is create a new Node web application. So let me open my console. Where are we? Okay, so make dir, let's name this Reactor SPA, right? And then make sure you change the directory there. So let me make this bigger so everybody can see what I'm doing. I had some nice colorization here with PowerShell, and then it's all gone. See what happens when you do updates. And also AZ Wildfire, welcome to the stream. It's a new haircut. I don't know, do you call it a haircut or an accident? I don't know. It went short. It's fine. So CD and then Reactor SPA or SPA. So first thing we need to do is npm init and -y. So this is going to create a base Node.js server. So now we need to install Express. Express is the UI layer on top of Node. So npm install Express Morgan. You know what? I should actually not type this. I could copy it. So if you're bored and you can't type, just do that. And you can copy paste. But I am a doofus this morning. So there you go. So this is going to install the appropriate npm packages to allow us to create a UI that we can play around with. Next step, open it in code. That's an easy one. So if you have already code installed, VS Code installed, then code dot, no matter where you are, it will allow you to open the current directory in code. So let's do this. Now, can everybody tell me whether they can see the dark theme, or should I change to a light theme, make it more visible? I think it's recommended that we use light themes for here. So let's theme. Preference color theme here. Let's do. See, I'm using the bearded theme, but maybe Visual Studio. Oh, it's too bright, but it's fine. It's fine. I can survive. So what do we have here? We have the. Let's put the code on the side, and let's put the browser on the other side here, so we can do side by side. Let's close this one down. Next thing that we need to do is create a server.js in the root of the folder. So let's do that. Server.js. And we're using plain vanilla JavaScript here. There is no... Thank you, Daryl. I'll stick with the white. Thank you for the feedback. Nice to know that following best practice is a good thing. Cool, cool, cool. Okay. So we have the server.js file. There's no TypeScript for this one. And for this one, I'm just going to use the copy. See? I'm not going to type the whole thing. Let's walk through the code a little bit so we can explain what's happening. We're acquiring the appropriate namespaces. Like in .NET, you use using to call a namespace. Here we're acquiring Express and Morgan and path, so we can interact with the path. We set the port to 3007. Can you paste the URL to the docs.max? Yeah, I can do that, absolutely. Just give me a second. So we're currently at this point here. We're at the stage 3 of the second module where we're doing the exercise. There you go, Rasgrove. We're setting up the port where we're going to run this. It's important because it needs to match our operating system. Remember that. We're creating a static website and we're listening to the port. And then when you press Control C, you can stop the service. So now we need to create a web page where we can actually go and sign in. Again, let's create a new index.html page. So I'll copy that, come here, press a nice button, index.html. And I'm going to paste that again. Let's hide it and see what's happening. A little bit of code. Remember, we talked about referencing the libraries. So here we're referencing Ajax, Bluebird. Okay, I haven't used Bluebird before. I don't know what it is. But this is the Amsel browser that we need. Next, we have a little bit of code. So we have some messaging here, and then we have the Amsel config. Now, you might see here that there are things that we need to fill in. We'll do that in a second. But this looks exactly the same as we talked before, right? The things that we had to do. So here we have Amsel config. Here we have graph, where we're going to be calling in a little bit. And then down here we have the Amsel instantiation, right? So there you go. Amsel public client application with the config that we need to pass in. Further down, we'll need to add some code to do login and to call the graph. So that's the next step in the workshop. So scroll down. Pay close attention where you add the code using the two to-dos. There you go, all the way at the bottom. If it wasn't clear enough, now it is. Okie dokie. So first function is update user interface. So let's do that. Add functions before this line, okay. I don't know what the difference between functions and code is. If anybody can tell me, that would be interesting. I mean, it's all code, isn't it? Okay. And then here we have another function. This is the acquire token and get user emails. So this is what will be called. So this update user interface will be called as soon as we sign in. So we sign in and then we want to update the UI to say, welcome Christos, or welcome John, thank you for signing in. Then here we have, and it turns the sign in button to sign out, as you can see here. So next we need to add the calling graph method. This is where we're going to acquire a token and be able to call graph. Okay, so following along, the text more or less explains what we did here, and then handle redirect promise. This one is using the redirect immediately before the to do. Okay, so let's add it here. We're following the instructions. So here. Okay, make sure to save your file before you run, and then get messages. So let's do that. Add the following function immediately before the to-do add functions. Let me just line that up properly. A little bit OCD with my lining. So this one again needs to be here, and this needs to come out here. And this is the actual call to the graph to get information. Okie dokie. Let's save this one. And finally, implement the signing. That's a little bit of handle response. I thought we already had a handle response up here. Update user interface, handle redirect promise. Okay, cool. So here, to do immediately before the to do add functions. Okay, so I think this one goes up here. I mean, it doesn't really matter, it's just JavaScript. So I think it's going further up. Yes. And sign in and sign out. So this one should be up there. Oh, okay. Too far out. And there's a Control-Shift-P or Control-Command-P and format document if you don't want to do that. There you go. Saves us some time. You can right-click and select format. Yeah, I know, Roscoe. I was just being facetious there, doing it manually, just making sure that we have everything we need. So I think that's all we need to run the code. Now, the next thing we need to do is create the operating system. So for that, let's head out to our Azure Active Directory admin center. Is that AAD? Yeah. So you can either go portal.azure.com and then go directly to your application. Enter password. So, bear with me while I remember my password. And this is on. And there will be a two-factor authentication as usual. See, it's all about security, my friends. 577050. Okie dokie. And then Azure Active Directory. So you can go aad.portal.azure.com or portal.azure.com, then open your Azure Active Directory and end up here. We have to do our app registration. So find your app registration. Let me zoom in a little bit. So app registration down here. And let's see, did I open? Oh God, I lost the. See, we're doing this one. So might as well have them side by side so that you can follow along as we do this. So here and here. Create your Azure Active Directory app registration. So here, app registrations, Identity SPA, just following along, right? Identity SPA. And we're going to use accounts from this organization only, so a single tenant app. And we're just going to press register. The reason why we did not provide the redirect URI here, I mean, you could, there's a drop down so you can say I want to use SPA, but it's nice to follow along. So what do we need from here? We need the application ID and the directory. So we'll use this information in a bit, so keep that in mind. And then next we need to go into authentication. And we want to say we want to add a platform, as it says here. And remember, we're doing single page app. And just copy that along. Remember, our application is running at port 3007. I have no idea why they didn't use the default for this workshop, but hey. So just paste it in the redirect URI. And that just says the redirect URI is eligible for authorization code flow with PKCE. We talked about PKCE, which is the modern secure way of doing things. So configure, that's all we need to do here. It's technically some minor configuration. So remember, the next step is to go and set up the config in our SPA to allow us to authenticate against this specific app registration, against this specific tenant. So here, let's go back to the overview again. Grab the application ID or client ID, back to our code, there. Nope, not this version. Too many codes up. There you go, this one. So all the way to the top, client ID, just paste that nice GUID in there. Then minimize this, grab the directory and go up again to our codes. And then for the authority, you can use HTTPS login.microsoft.com and then your directory, either directory name or directory ID. They both work. And then for the redirect URI, should be HTTP localhost 3007. And one too many zeros. I hope everybody was paying attention. Okay. And we can now test the application. Whoop, whoop. Right, let's do this. Copy. Open your console and type node. Hey, Pidit. How you doing, sir? Thank you for watching us while you're playing Minecraft. I don't know, can you play Minecraft and watch the workshop? I hope you were focused. Paying attention. Server.js. So we're just about to launch and test the configuration. Oh, you know what? We haven't saved the file here. Make sure you save everything before you run. Okie dokie. So now that should be all we need. Listening to on port 3007. So all we need to do now is open the browser, which we already have open up here. Navigate to HTTP localhost 3007. Ooh, nice. Microsoft Authentication Library for JavaScript Amsel exercise. Let's sign in. Will it work? Tan, tan, tan. Okay, so make sure that you sign in with the tenant that you're using. I don't know if you have multiple, but as you can see here, I have multiple ones. So it asks me to sign in. Now it says, there are some permissions. You need to consent. As a user, I need to consent and say that I'm happy for the application to sign in and read my profile. This is the OpenID scope. Then it reads my email. So that's the mail.read scope that we added for Graph. And maintain access. So that's the offline scope that we provide. I don't want to consent on behalf of my organization. And then I will say accept. And this will sign me in and bring back my sample emails that I received on my tenant. So there you have it. It's all working end to end. How awesome is that? Right. I hope everyone has managed to get to this point. Hope we don't have any questions. Are there any questions before we move on to the next exercise? So you saw a single page app, Amsel 2.0 with PKC. Why is there only one logout URL? Feel I'm missing a concept here. Do you want to have multiple logout URLs? This is where once you sign out from your Azure AD tenant, and we destroy the session cookie, it takes you back. Once you sign out from Azure Active Directory, it will take you back to a specific endpoint that you provide. I don't think you're missing a concept. Are you talking about login URL or logout URL? Daryl, I know you have a question there. This is where once you sign out for the logout, once you sign out, it will take you host. Oh, you can have, that's what you're saying. You know what? I haven't tested that. I didn't realize that you only have one. Good point. So if I go back to our here, what Daryl is asking in the authentication, you only have one logout URL. Good point. I don't know. Maybe that's a feature request that we can have, because if people haven't noticed, you can add multiple URIs for the sign in, but you only have one sign out. And you know what? Typically, we recommend people that they use different operating stations for test and different operating stations for production. And usually, there's even a different tenant altogether. So what's the redirect URL used for? So this one up here is once you sign in, it will use that information to send the token back to. Yes, exactly. So it means, So it means that when you sign in, whether you're running on SPA, like single page app, or whether you're running on a server side application, you want to ensure that the tokens are only returned to a specific place, right? Or the caller at least. So if your caller is an SPA, then you define where the redirect will be in your code, whether it's HTTP localhost or HTTPS, some domain name that your application is running for. Yeah, it doesn't have to be server-side code, Rasco. Just a location that needs to match where your application is running. And if you mismatch that, then you won't be able to get your token back, and it will throw up a nice error message. Okie dokie. Now make sure that if you have more questions after that, at the very top of the screen here, you should see the Discord link. So if you have any questions related to the workshop or anything related to identity in general, or if you want to chat with a fun community, make sure you join our Discord, friends, because this is where all the fun activity happens outside of streaming. Okay, so we're done with this part of the exercise. Let's move on to the next part of the exercise, which should be server-side applications. So let's scroll all the way down. Oh, there's a test. Let's see if you were actually paying attention. So let's do this. First question. Which of the following options isn't a characteristic that makes SPA stand out from web apps? And by web apps, they mean server-side applications that run on the server, like .NET or Node or Java. Security characteristics of these apps are different from traditional server-side web applications. Remember, it says it isn't. It's a trick question. JavaScript-based client-side solutions don't have the ability to process the authorization code used in other OAuth 2.0 flows. Full-page browser redirects away from the app. Become invasive to the user experience. I mean, that's very subjective. And then many authorization servers and identity providers don't support CORS requests, cross-origin resource security, if I remember correctly, my acronyms. So make sure you answer the one that you think is right. And then why is an application secret not required when authenticating with Azure AD in an SPA? Instead of using an app secret, the SPA can use an X509 certificate. One of the two options is required. They aren't needed because the user's password acts as a Azure AD app secret. Secrets can be reliably secured in an SPA because it's inherently a client-side application. In no scenario can the secret reach the user's browser and be secured. Let's see if I know my stuff. Damn, I pass. Do you guys pass as well? Let's move on to the next session or the next step. So now we're in Unit 4. And now we're going to be talking about web apps that sign users and call APIs. Unlike SPAs, traditional web apps, what are they called, traditional web apps? Apparently somebody called Nirvana classic rock the other day, so I am old. Back in my day, when we used to write web apps, it was all about server-side code. And people still write server-side code, so I'm just kidding. So developers can use these frameworks to build server-side applications that can authenticate using the OAuth 2 protocol. And for this, now you might say this is also fairly new. The OAuth 2 authorization code grant flow. Up until very recently, implicit grant, for example, was the only way for .NET Core and .NET. But now we also support PKC as well, although this workshop will be using the implicit flow for now. So the authorization code flow is common for most of the websites. The nice thing with authorization code flow is that because it's server-side code, it runs outside the client browser, and that means that you don't have to worry about secrets spilling out. Unlike SPA, where all the code runs on the client side and can be intercepted, server-side code will only send stuff to the client side once it gets filtered and once it gets optimized. So again, we're going to follow the same exact process. We have to create an app registration to show our intent to Azure AD to use Azure AD for signing in users. But unlike SPAs, we will use the web. We'll go and configure that. You see we have implicit grant used for this example, but .NET Core can support PKC with authorization code flow, so you don't have to use implicit flow anymore. So here we're also going to use a secret. Because server-side code, we are allowed to use a secret. And the secret is going to be used not for the sign-in, but for acquiring the token after the user signs in, right? So we'll send the client ID and the client secret to say, go and get me a token for this user and return it back to the application using the implicit flow. From a .NET perspective, things have moved on quite significantly. So up until .NET 3.1, .NET Core 3.1 and older, full framework and .NET Core, you had to use two different libraries. You had the Azure Identity with, the Asp Net Identity Library to go and sign in the users, and then you had to use Amsel separately to go and acquire tokens. So once the user signs in and they need to access an API or another resource, they had to use Amsel to go and acquire that token. So it was two separate libraries, and it was a little bit confusing because it created this kind of a chasm between the two things. With .NET Core 3.1 and onwards, we created a brand new library called Microsoft.identity.web, which allows Asp Net Core applications to go and sign in and acquire tokens all with one library. That library is wrapped around Amsel and works for both APIs and front ends and server-side code. And it's a lot more lightweight. It takes like a single line of code to configure everything, so much simpler than before, especially when it comes to. So Carlos is asking on YouTube, is there a need to take care of additional CSRF protection to protect API endpoints? Not from an authentication perspective, but from other resources, yes, but not for your authentication stuff. especially with Pixie, it's all covered for you. So authorization code flow with Pixie is all good. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, so where were we? We were here, right? So very similar to our code sample that we had for JavaScript or the SPA stuff, we need a configuration that indicates where we're going to go to sign in our users and acquire tokens. So this is standard kind of experience. Microsoft Identity Web has significantly improved things. By the way, there's a new library, there's a new CLI that is currently being worked at to allow you to not only add the code that is responsible for configuring the authentication, but it will also go and configure your Azure Active Directory operating system. So with Microsoft Identity Web, we can spin up the code components and the configuration, but it's not ready to press F5 and go. So with a new tool, we will also be able to not only configure the authentication, but also configure your Azure Active Directory operating system and configure your app so you can press F5 as soon as you run that and it will be good to go. So even less work for developers. Isn't that amazing? Right. So config here, then some code here for configuring the services. Some of them is about consenting, same site policy, and same site cookie, which is something that came to be an issue for the last year or so. So you need to handle same site cookies. And then technically, if you're signing in a user, the only thing that you need is this line over here. Add Microsoft Identity Web authentication with the configuration. This is all you need in .NET to tell it to go and sign in my users. The other two lines are for acquiring tokens to call other APIs later on. Again, it's a single liner. And then finally, we do give the ability to now use a token cache out of the box. So it can be a memory cache, it can be a session cache, it can be a distributed cache like a SQL Server or Redis or Cosmos DB, whatever you like to use for your token caching. And if you already have a cache configured for your application, then you can stick it in here as well. Then we have controllers with views if you're using an MVC application. If you're using a Razor page, the structure is slightly different, or the wording. And we definitely want to require authenticated users for all the pages. And finally, down here, add Microsoft Identity.ui. This is the library that handles the sign in and sign out pages for you. So you don't have to write a custom sign-in page or a sign-out page. It's all built into the UI or into the library, and it presents the UI to the user. It does the redirects, and it does everything you need. And then signing in, again, once the user signs in, then you can go and acquire tokens silently for you. You can see here, if that token fails, you can go and have an interactive session as well. And finally, for calling the APIs, there's a new library, or there's a new class called, or interface called iToken Acquisition, which can be injected into your controllers and your services. And with that, you can just call it here to go and acquire the token for the user. It will work out whether it needs to be silent or interactive. Silent means it happens behind the scenes. Your users don't have to see it. If it needs to be interactive, it will pop up a message and prompt the user to sign in again to acquire the appropriate permissions. And finally, once we get the token, we pass it into the header to make our request to the graph lines. And that's all we need. Now let's see if there are any questions anywhere. No, there are no questions. So next step is we go and build an app. We go to build an Asp Net app. So first thing, you need to make sure that you have .NET installed. So let's stop this one here. Let's come out from here. If you want to check what your .NET version is, .NET -- version, and it will tell you. I am using 5.0. 6.0 is actually on preview too. So if you are interested in living dangerously and you want to play around with .NET Core, then 6.0 is actually available as well. Remember, you can have them installed side by side, so you don't have to be or one or the other. You can have multiple, and then you can point your application to use the one that you want. Side note. Okay, so let's go. Continue. Exercise. web apps that sign in users and call APIs. That's what we're doing today. We're taking a break. I'm happy to take a break now. I was planning on taking a break at the top of the hour, but maybe that's a good point now to take a break. Let's say 4 minutes. So 5 minutes to 11 or 5 minutes to 2. We can take a break. Yeah, man. Let's do, or yeah, Miraz go. So I made an assumption there that you're your male, but yeah, we're taking a break. So let me roll the credits and then we are going to reconvene in 4 minutes or 3 minutes. What's up, everyone? We're back. Okay, hope you're all excited for this part. By the way, is there anything worse than putting disinfectant onto your cat? Like I got a paper cut here. I put some disinfectant, and that woke me up. So it's better than coffee, by the way, if you want to start your day like that. Okay. So next stage is us building the .NET Core Asp Net MVC application and adding sign-in to this one. So first thing we have to do is go and actually create an app registration. Let's put these things side by side. Let's close this one down. I think I already have a window open with my... Do I have a window open? Yes, we do. Azure Active Directory. Let's put them side by side so we can follow along. So before we write any code, we need to actually create the app registration. So authentication, let's go back to the root. So up here, new app registration. Let's go new, and then again, we're doing single page app. Sorry, we're doing single org. So this one is Identity Web App. Okay. Identity Web App. Hope everyone is up and following along. Account in this organization, again, we're doing this. Remember, you can select what kind of authentication you want, but I'll always prefer to do it via the next stage, which is the authentication. So let's press register on this one. It takes a couple of seconds. Then the next step is to go and add the authentication. So here, add the platform. Since we're building web, that includes Java, Python, .NET, and Node applications. So if you're running Node APIs or Node backend, server to a front end like Angular, you can use this one as well. So we'll press this one. So it asks us what redirect we want to use. I like that fixation with HTTP port 3007. So let's do HTTPS localhost 3007. And this is the standard one. So we need to press, oh, it also requires an HTTPS logout. HTTPS logout localhost 3007 with too many zeros, and then sign out and dash OIDC, OpenID Connect. It says add an ID token. So we're going to be using implicit grant for this one, but please remember that oh, just open Discord on my phone. How do I get to your channel? It's oh yeah, somebody already put it there. Okay. So as I said, there is a way to configure .NET Core to use the authorization code flow with Pixie. But for now, we'll leave it at that. And let's press configure. Now we also need to add the correct URI for the redirect. So .NET Core or ASP.NET Core applications expect the redirect URI to be at a specific location. And that is the HTTPS, whatever port you're running, and then sign in OIDC or OpenID Connect. So make sure you add it there. It's okay. Make sure to press save up there. So we're done that. And then we need to go and create a client secret. So for now, I'm going to be creating this one, new client secret, always default to 1 year. Just name it Reactor Demo. Just call it whatever you like. It doesn't matter. It's very specific to your app. It doesn't have to be unique. Make sure you select 1 year and then create. Now down here, you'll find the value. Nice thing is that if you have the screen compressed, you can't see the full value. If you ever dox yourself by putting it out there and making it live, just take your screen offline like this, create a new one and add it back in, right? Just make sure you don't compromise your security by passing the secrets. But you're gonna see it anyway when I configure my app, so it's fine. But make sure you copy it right now, because if you move away and go somewhere else to do, like, you navigate away from this page, then you won't be able to see it. So I open Notepad. I'm going to put in Notepad so I can have it handy. You guys do the same. And we have our secret now. Something. They named it something. I like that. And then copy. By the way, you see the UI changed a little bit here because now we have a value and an ID. Do not copy the ID. I've done this before. The ID does work. Okay. So now we just need to go and create our web app. And for that, we'll use the console again. Now, if you're on Visual Studio, you can use Visual Studio 2019. Latest version will support Microsoft Identity Web. CLS this one. But I like to use the command line for some weird reason. I am weird. You don't have to use that. But in VS Code, you don't have a template. So you need to template the whole thing. And to do that in VS Code, we use the command line, .NET By the way, you can do it also inside VS Code, right? So .NET, then you type new MVC. So we're creating an MVC application, the full model view controller rather than Razor Pages. And dust us auth, and then single org. Man, I can't type today. Save my life. And then O for output. And I think they use something like identity web. Okay, identity web. This will go and create our project for us. It will create the appropriate templates. And then we need to make sure we change directory to this one. Say cd identity web. And then let's open in code. Am I moving too far? Okay, here. You know what? Before we do that, you don't need to, we did the CD. We already have the two NuGet packages here, so you don't need to install them again. But you definitely need to install this one. So .NET add package Microsoft Graph. This will go and install the appropriate Microsoft Graph NuGet package to our solution. And with that, I think we have everything we need to open any code. So if you remember the command, code dot in the appropriate directory, will open it for us. There you have it. Now, code usually asks to install the appropriate missing components and maybe install the latest libraries for you. Let's see. Ooh, that identity web is slightly out of date, so maybe we need to run the command anyway. Okay, yes. I think the current version is 1.8, so let's go and confirm that. Always make sure to keep your NuGet packages up to date, my friends. Will we be able to replay this session and last week's sessions with sound later? Yes, you will. It's actually on our YouTube channel. So if you go into, let me see. Let me find it for you, my friend. Just give me a second. YouTube. We actually have a playlist as well that is just designed for this workshop, so you should be able to go directly and find it there. Playlist, and we have a playlist here for identity crisis. No, that's not the one. This is the one that we want. So just putting it on the channel here. There you go, sir. It will all be available to you to watch offline. Yes. And as Rebecca said, make sure that you register for the subsequent week's worth of workshops, because we have other things to talk about as well. So let's do nuget.org. Oh, interesting. Oh, I can search Microsoft.identity.web. That's amazing. You can search for that. I think it's 1.8 right now. There you go, 1.8. So let's update this to 8, not 8.8, and save, and this will actually prompt to restore. So it's totally up to you how you want to upgrade your NuGet packages. So now that we have that, we should be all good to kick it. 10 projects to restore, done. Okay, what's the next step? Code here, and browser here. Okay. Update the web application launch configuration. That is true. So properties, launch settings. Remember, we changed the URI to be 3007 because obviously we don't like the defaults. I don't know why. And that means that we need to be here. HTTP IS settings, IS Express application URL needs to be HTTPS, and that should be 5001. Oh, sorry, 3007. And then SSL port 3007. And since we're running on Kestrel, not IIS, we need to update this one to be HTTPS 3007. And we don't need the HTTP version anymore, because we are safe. What? No. There. What? There. Done. Save. Make sure you save. I always forget to save. Okie dokie. So here we are. Everything we need. And then app settings.json. That is right. We need to configure our app settings. This is where we tell the application where to go to authenticate. So for your instance, that stays the same. For your domain, you need to use the domain of your Azure Active Directory. Overview. And then here, that's your domain. So cmatkas.onmicrosoft.com. This is where you can find your domain if you're running a custom domain. So there you go. And for our tenant ID, we need to go back to our app registration. So app registrations, our identity.web, if I remember correctly. Quite a few here. Identity web, all the way down. Or you can also search for it. Application ID. Make sure you put in the application ID or client ID. Don't mix the two. And then for the tenant ID, let's go back to the browser. Here, our tenant ID, it's down here. The identity of our Azure AD. And remember that sign-in OIDC needs to match our configuration, which should be matching if you've been following the instructions. So make sure to save this one as well. And now we can go back into our code. Now it says add the following using statements after the existing statements. The web and web UI should be there. Let's go and make sure that this is the case. So in our startup.cs, close this one, we have our startup. You'll notice here that we say services, add authentication, OpenID Connect defaults, and then add Microsoft.web app. This needs to slightly change to match this. So, yep. So what we can do is grab the whole thing here, remove it, and then grab the copy from here and add it there. What did I do? Control V. And Control Shift 3, format document. Nice and, well, it didn't format the whole thing, isn't it fun? So the first one is handling the cookie policy. The second one is, yeah, Bolt, I'm running solo again. Our friend JP couldn't join us. Oh man, I forgot to put my lights on. I'm super dark down here. Is that better? Can you see me better now? There you go. Ta-da! Let there be light. And handling the cookie policy up top, then we're looking at Microsoft Identity web app authentication with our configuration settings, which are coming from our app settings.json. Then enable token acquisition to call downstream API. We're going to be calling graph, and we need that statement so we can acquire the tokens. And the in-memory token cache, which allows us to store it into the cache, so we don't have to go and acquire the token every single time while the application is running. If you stop the application, it will lose the token. What is next? And then down here, obviously, we want to require authentication, and that's the UI that will handle the sign in and sign out redirects. Add the user controller and view to the web app. So we need a user controller.cs. Let's go and add that. So in the controllers folder here, let's add a new file called user controller.cs without spaces. And then in here, we just need to paste the whole thing. And let's walk through this file to see what it does and what do we have here. So we have the user controller, we have a logger, and the iToken acquisition, which we talked about. Damn, it's hailing outside. Whew. I'm so glad I'm not out there. Okay. The iToken acquisition is the one that allows us to acquire tokens. They get injected via dependency injection, which is all built into Asp Net Core and the Microsoft Identity Web Library. And then down here we have the authorize for scopes. It means that when the call comes to find that information, like when we call the index for the user controller, i.e. the base library, it will ask for these specific scopes. These are the scopes that need to be present in the token. Otherwise, it will not allow us to go and acquire the token. And then you see down here, token acquisition grabs the token, puts it in the request header. And then in the graph client, we can pass it directly. So the graph client will actually inherit that information from up here. Because we already have a token, it will be passed in. You see the graph client gets instantiated with the appropriate request headers. And if you don't like this approach, then you can actually, there's a Microsoft.identity.web.graph library that will even do more automation on that. And you just inject the graph client, but I don't want to confuse you with that. Okay, I think that's all we need. Oh, we need a view. We need a view. Creates that. So we need a view. Add a new folder user to the views. Okay. New folder views. Where are the views? New folder. Done. User. And then here we need an index.cshtml, which will correspond to the controller method. And with that, we have a view to show stuff. And here we're going to add that, which is the user page, and then it will show my name in the model. So one thing I want to go over that we haven't covered yet is how the sign in and sign out things take place. So let me save this one. Make sure you save all your files, friends, because I've been caught by that before. So here, startup.csv, we didn't save that one. Okay, so there is under view, under share, there's a login partial. And this is where users will be coming when they're authenticated, unauthenticated, and they need to interact with the identity system. So there's a built-in max the code screen. Yes, thank you. There you go. You're absolutely right. Since we're not writing any code now, we close this one down. So here we have our user identity if we're already signed in. And if we are signed in, it will present us with a sign out message or sign out button. And then the built-in UI in Microsoft.identity.web will take care of signing in and signing out, redirecting the user to where they need to go. So let's run the code. Wait a minute, is there anything else we need to do? I just need to check, because we create a client secret, but I don't see where they're using it. I wonder if we skip the step. Doesn't seem like it. Add the package, settings. Oh yeah, there you go. We missed a step, and that wouldn't have worked. Okay, I skipped a step. Good thing I remembered. Okay, back to our code. Open your app settings.json, add a client secret down here. And then remember the client secret that we talked about? I'm just going to paste it here, and I will wipe it out after this, so you won't be able to use it. But here, comma, make sure you add the comma. And now we have everything we need to run the application. So let's see, will it run? Let's close this one down. I saved everything, I think. Wait a minute, did I add the right one? That's that's our JavaScript. Okay, just making sure that we have the right one up. Yep. Make sure I dox myself a few times. Now let's run it. It says .NET build and .NET run down here. Just if you're running in production, if you're running on your local environment, .NET run will also do a .NET build. But let's do .NET build in case there are any typos or any issues in our code. I mean, it's a copy-paste scenario, so, oh God, what did I fail? Same site doesn't, you know what? We haven't resolved all our namespaces. I'm surprised I did not complain about that before. Aha. Make sure you resolve all your namespaces. We have a question. If we have an existing web app like the current server-side example where we authenticate with server-side C#, can we still use JavaScript Ajax to enhance it? Would we need to use Amsel.js? How would we get the token for the Ajax call? Okay, so I suspect that you're saying you have an Asp Net core application that is doing the server-side stuff, and then you have is that an API? And then you have probably an SPA like where's my other? And you have an SPA running on top of yeah, both. So you can do that. Your token will be stored in the session, so you should be able to acquire it. So it's not stopping you from although in saying that, for your front end, if you are using a front end to authenticate, then you will need to use Amsel.js to do that. And then your back end will have to use Microsoft Identity Web to validate the tokens because it works both in web and API. So that is a supported scenario. You just need to implement the authentication on both the front end and the back end. But you don't need to sign in the user from the server-side code. You're going to be using the SPA model that we showed before to authenticate the user and then pass the tokens back to the backend, if that makes sense. Okay, let's run this one. And again, if you have questions about all we're talking about, make sure that you join the Discord, which is at the very top of the stream, 4 to 5. So Discord, join. Any questions around identity or architecture or how to build your app securely, make sure to join the discussion. So .NET Run again, .NET Build, sorry. .NET Build. What the? Did I not save? I did not save. See? Save. Save your files, friends. .NET Build. Okay. Building. Let's run it. We're running at localhost 3007, so let's open this one. Bring it over here. So the first thing it will do is actually ask us to authenticate because it requires authentication across the board. We're going to use the already signed in user. It will ask for permissions. It will ask for consent to check my profile and have offline access. The standard OpenID connect permissions. And here we have that one. Now we need to go into the user, I think. Ta-da! It's compiling. Let's ship it. Exactly, BSD code is ready for production. So as you can see here, it's all working. This information came from the graph. The information up here, it's coming from the currently signed in user. So the identity libraries inside ASP.NET work with the Amsel libraries, the Microsoft Identity Web, to set up the user context and the identity on that HTTP context. And then the call to the user is the explicit call that we made to graph to go and grab my name. So just to clarify where that happened, you see here we have the graph client will make the call to the user read endpoint. And then here we're getting the me. So you can read my profile in effect. And then from here, we pass the user back to the view, and the view decides what to display to the user. We could have been a lot more explicit and just pass the one value. But in this instance, we use the view to be a little bit more loose with how we did it. And from here, we just take the display name from the graph object. If you want to see what that full graph object looks like, you can go to ak.ms GE, the Graph Explorer, and make the exact same call. So I will sign in with my, which one did you use? Okay, cool. You use the right one. So run the query. And this is the call that I made actually. Let me make this bigger so everybody can see it. Let's close this one. So the display name is what it grabbed from the the me object and displayed it to the page. Done and done. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Let me see if we have any questions on the YouTube channel. We don't have any questions there, so we're all good. If you have any questions before I move to the next one, now it's a good time to do it. Okay, while I get ready for the next one. So let's stop this process. Let's answer the questions in the summary. Test your knowledge. Which of the following unique characteristics of the authorization code grant flow makes it the preferred option for securing web apps? The web app never has to access the user's credentials because the user signs in with the Azure ID, not with the app. All communication between the web app and the Azure ID is secure. The web app authenticates with Azure ID using X509 certificate when obtaining an access token. What elements are required to create, configure, and/or collect when registering an Azure AD app for use with the OAuth 2 authorization code grant flow? Tenant ID, application ID, application secret, and redirect URI. Application ID, application secret, and the redirect URI. Tenant ID, application ID, and the application secret. What? I hate these questions. Done. I failed. Need to go back to the drawing board. Did everyone pass? Okay, good. Let's move on. Daemon and non-interactive applications. I'll get it next time. Yeah, you never know. I go back to do my study. So we talked about interactive web apps. SPAs and web apps have user interaction where we expect the user to come in and sign in and give consent and what have you, which means that we have the ability to present something to the user. With daemon and non-interactive apps like console applications or jobs, we may want to automate processes for us and react to certain things like timers or events happening. And for that, we need something to happen without the user's consent. It's calling stuff on behalf of a specific account. So in this unit, we're going to see how all that happens. Okay, so instead of user permissions, we're actually using application permissions for daemon apps because it's an application, right? The application is given permissions to a set of scopes, a set of accounts, and then it can go and interact on our behalf. Examples: web applications that use to provision or administer users to do batch processes in the directory. I don't think a web application is a daemon app, but fine. I think it's a web job, not a web application. Desktop applications, Windows services, daemons on Linux to do batch jobs, and web APIs that need to manipulate directories, not specific users. So imagine an API that needs to go and get emails for all the users, or to get all the files in an enterprise OneDrive to go and do something. Very common here, like Azure Functions. I don't know if you use Azure Functions, the ability to automate quite a few things. Think of them as headless or daemon apps, even though they're serverless solutions running somewhere. That's one way to do things, and they respond to events. Okay, and applications that acquire token for their own identities, confidential client applications, so they're not public. They're confidential because they're running, they have client secrets, and we know that they don't require user access to do that, and they have a registered secret. Now, ideally, you want to move away from using secrets and using a certificate, but for the purpose of this test, we'll be using the client credential flow with client secrets. But usually the recommendation is that you use an X509 certificate, you store it in Azure AD, and then you reference that in your code. That certificate also needs to exist on the machine that is currently running, or you can use Key Vault to go and acquire the certificate and authenticate with that. So many different ways to skin the same cat, but ideally you want to avoid secrets because secrets can fall in the wrong hands, they can be secured, and it's a lot harder to read certificates than secrets. So the So unlike the previous scenario where we talked about the authorization code flow and the implicit flows, now we're using the client credential flow. This is the one that we use with confidential clients and daemon apps. So the first thing we need to do is go and create the app registration in the portal. That's what we'll do next. So the daemon applications can only request application permissions to APIs. So it's not delegated. It's not doing it on behalf of the user. It's doing it blank for all users. So think about if you have a task that needs to go and check everybody's calendar, it needs to be given permissions to read all the calendars, not just a specific user, because the application is not running as a user. It's running as an application. It's a headless one. So here you'll notice that instead of using delegated permissions, which is the default one when you create a new app registration and the mail.read or user.read is there for you, you need to use application permissions. So we need mail.read, for example, or mail.read basic all. And then we need to grant admin consent. So with the SPA and the .NET Asp Net Core application that we saw earlier on, I was presented with a screen where I had to consent, a pop-up that said, do you consent to for this application to use that information, your information? Unlike that, because this is a headless app and there's no way for a user to consent, and because it's running as an application and it has application permissions, we need to grant admin consent upfront. That means that if you are using a non-test tenant, the developer tenant that we created on the first iteration, I highly recommend you use that for examples like this. You would need to get admin consent from somebody in your organization to grant this, and it can be a fairly complex process depending on your organization. So at Microsoft, it takes days. We need to escalate a request, and we need to get approval for it because it's hard to acquire. Like, there's all these questions: why do you need all that access, and why do you need admin consent for this? So if you are testing stuff like that, depending on the permissions, you need to grant admin consent. It's better to do it on a developer test tenant and then take it back to your boss and say, I've built the app, I know it's working, now we need to get consent. Again, we're going to be using the Amsel.NET library for this. There's an Amsel.NET library. The namespace is Microsoft.identity.client rather than web. And again, we need to pass some information. The tenant, the client, remember the configuration that is consistent across the board. You notice the theme, right? The Amsel library has a client, public client, a confidential client. The Amsel instance expects this information to be passed in as a config. So here you'll see we have the information passed here. And then the code then will use that information in the confidential client to build the confidential client. And then if you prefer to use a certificate, you can do it here. You can create a self-signed certificate and use that if you prefer. And then signing in acquire tokens. Now, there's no interactive session here, so the application will go and it will use the confidential client to acquire the token for the client, not for the user. And it needs to have the scopes already. You'll notice that we say default. It's very different to requesting individual scopes. If you want to know when and how to use the .default, we have a fantastic blog post, so let me find that for you. This was written by JP, who did the previous workshop with me. So if you are curious about when and how to use the .default, there's a fantastic blog post. I put it out there. Let me put it on the chat here as well. And let me show it to you in case you don't believe me. Self-promotion. So what is the .default scope and when to use it? Okay. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but we need to request all the scopes up front. So whatever it's in the app registration, we will request that. 5 scopes, as long as they're for the same resource. And then we'll get the token. And then with that token, we can go and call other APIs. So here you'll notice that we have an Amsel authentication provider. In effect, it's a wrapper around the authorization. It can allow us to pass the provider to other resources like the graph client. So the Graph client expects an authentication provider, and we're using our Amsel authentication provider to go and grab the tokens for us and pass them back to the Graph client so we can actually go and request the user's email. Targeted user ID message. Wow, okay. So there you have it. Let's go and build this up. Any questions so far? No questions. Can these application settings be stored in Key Vault? Absolutely, Raskov. Now the challenge with that is that you need to somehow access Key Vault in your application. So there is a Key Vault provider for you. It means that if you use Azure.Identity, you can spin up your credentials to Key Vault. So there are a few ways to secure the app from putting in clear text. One is using .NET user secrets. So let's do, where's my command line? Yeah, so here, cd, actually let's stay here. So .NET user secrets. .NET user secrets. Did I not put that one there? Yeah. Do I need to do an init? .NET demystify something. Do I need to install? Oh, I'm mistyping it, obviously. I need more coffee. You guys are not paying attention. So first you need to do an init. And .NET secrets will allow you to at least take the secrets out of the config file and put them into a GUID that is only accessible, a GUID file that is only accessible to you and by your application only, which is great, but it doesn't scale. So if you have 2 developers in your team, then they both have to manage the secrets and it's not manageable. So using the Azure Identity Library, Azure, so aka.ms, aka.ms AZSDK. Before I dox myself, there's a .NET set of libraries. Oh my God, this does not work well on the. And then in here you have the Azure Identity, which is one of the core libraries. There should be another one. This allows your current machine to authenticate using either the CLI credentials, the Visual Studio Code credentials, the VS Code credentials, the Visual Studio credentials, or a managed identity. And then it will authenticate against Key Vault. As long as your current signed-in identity has permission to access Key Vault, then you can go and grab the secret or the certificate and then pass it to your confidential client. That would be the recommended way to do it. We always recommend that. We have blog posts to show how to do it. So if you go to my blog posts, shameless plug here, and I say Key Vault. There's the blog post. Go and hit that one. You can also do it in JavaScript, Node, Python, Go, whatever we support. Okay, so that's the way to do it. Please go and do that. Let's go to the exercise because I think we have 25 minutes and we can do it in 25 minutes. Trust me. Nope, that went too far away. Pin it. Pin it. Okay, what's the first step? Go and create the app registration. Fine, we can do that. Okay, so root, app registrations, new registration, and that will be identity daemon. There you go. Identity daemon. Only accounts on this organization. That is correct. Nothing else down here. Registered. This baby. Then we need to come back here and grab that information. configure the authentication components. That's the third time that we're doing it, so you should be able to follow along by now. Remember, at the platform, but now instead of doing web, we're doing mobile and desktop applications. Right? And then down here it says which one do you want to use. You can use this one if you're using Amsel, but the recommendation is to go with the top. You can actually select all three if you want to. It's totally up to you. And then we don't have a custom redirect URI, so press configure. We don't need to press save. That's the redirect URI here. And then we need to go and create a secret. Now, if you already have a certificate that you want to use, you can upload it here and reference it in your code, both for web and web APIs or client apps like this one, but we're going to create a secret. What kind of name do we need to give it? This will be reactor. Let's break the mold and do our own thing. Something, they call it something. That's not something. We're in reactor mode. Remember, copy that value because it will go away. Now, if it goes away and you lose it, it's fine. You can go back and create a new one. No harm done. I'm gonna put it in my notepad so I can reference it in a bit. And then next we have to save that, copy that, and grant Azure AD application permissions to Microsoft Graph. Now remember, this is important. If we go into the API permissions, here it is just delegated, so we don't want that. Let's remove that from here. Yes. Add the permission. So here we want to Microsoft Graph, but this is an application permission. And here it just needs mail.read. Okay. Open this one, click on that. Do we need anything else? No. Fine. We got the right one. So remember, very important, click on the admin consent require. We need to consent for this one. So here. Now, I hope that, did you select the option for mobile apps? Yeah, it's mobile and desktop apps. Yeah. Let me show you again. Authentication, add platform. It says mobile and desktop application. So Windows UWP console, IoT, limit entry, classic iOS and Android. So they're both public clients. They cannot be, at least for a console, we're confidential clients. For web apps, we're public clients. Okay, but we are using the client credential flow. Yep, no worries, happy to help. So here we have everything we need. We added the consent and the APIs. Now let's go and create our console app. Again, the command line. Again, if you're doing any Visual Studio, you can do all this from Visual Studio using the wizard, but assuming that everyone is not using Windows and not Visual Studio, we are going to follow the console. New console, and then dash o graph daemon. I don't know why I didn't copy that again. Ignore me. This will create a new console app, and then in here it's going to it has not any libraries whatsoever, so we'll need to do that as the next step. Check that out. It has everything we need. So let's paste anyway. What's the worst that can happen? Could not find project. CD. Okay, so now I'm going to add them one at a time. Fine. So remember how I talked about the Amsel Library? It's called Microsoft Identity.client instead of web, which we're using before. We added that. Let's add the graph, which will allow us to do calls to the graph. Yes. Cool. Now we need to add the extensions configuration. And that's because by default, our console app does not have access to an app settings.json. So if we want to work with that, we need to add the appropriate extensions. Let's see if that will work if I add both, rather than doing them one at a time. And now we're ready to open this in code. two codes now. I like it. Oh, okay. So here we have what we need. Let's go and make sure that we have the appropriate NuGet packages installed. Yeah, we have the extensions. Yes, go and do that. We have graph that we added, client, configuration, and stuff. So it's all here for us. Now we need to write some code. Remember, config settings. Now it's a simple app. You don't really have to use a config file, but let's do it the right way. You can all do it in line the code. By the way, has anybody tried the new stuff for, I think it's .NET 6 now, that you don't need to, you can have top level statements, so you don't have to actually reference all the namespaces. It would be fun to actually update these workshops to use that. Okay, app settings.json. Again, another side note. Let's add this, which we will use in a second. Oh, we need to update straight away. Okay, let's go and do that. So target user ID. So tenant ID, your tenant ID goes here. And we have that in the app registration. So if we go back here, at the very top of the overview, the client ID. So let's go and get that. God. Talking about consistency, right? Application ID here, not client ID. I'm not going to change it for now, but just make sure that it's the same thing, right? Don't get confused. Application ID, client ID are interchangeably used. Okay. Next is our tenant ID. Our tenant ID or directory ID goes here. It says it with uppercase letters. The secret goes there. Remember, I will be deleting all these secrets, so don't go using my secrets. There. And finally, target.userid here. Oh, okay, let's see. It doesn't say anything about that, but let's ignore it for now. I know how to get it, but I want to follow the instructions rather than jumping ahead. So let's say it says, let's add some code. Create a new auth handler.cs in the helpers folder. Okay, we need a folder. We're talking about structure here. Things are getting serious, friends. Right. Okay, graph daemon, add a folder. So helpers, proper architecture. We're not messing around. Auth handler.cs. Okay, now here we just need to add this code, paste there, and this is the one that will go and get the, we'll use the authentication provider, and it will get the token and send a sync. Okay. Next, we need an Amsel Authentication Provider class, file in the helpers. Okay. Moving along. Add this. Done. And then let's copy and paste. Remember, we talked about the provider, the one that will go away and go and grab the tokens for us and then return the token. And because the graph client requires somebody to go and get the token for us, we need a provider, so we'll use this one. That's the whole purpose of this whole class here. Now incorporate Microsoft Graph into the console application. So at the program.cs, let's go here. Let's add the appropriate references. So there, save that. Make sure you always save because I made that mistake before and we had an issue. App settings. Let's save this one as well for now. So in program.cs, we need to add some references. Right now they're not used, so it's absolutely fine. Let's go here in the program. This will go and retrieve the it will load the settings first. No, sorry. Add the following to the program class. Yes, that's a not inside main. We need to do it as a separate method. God, formatting. Control-Shift P, format document. Because I refuse to learn the shortcut, I want the system to do it for me. Okay, so this one will load the appropriate settings. So they need to match in name if you want to rename them. Please make sure you do that carefully. And then we need to write a code that will actually go and reference the authentication provider or grab it. Add the following method to the program class. Okay, let's do that. Before or after, what do you guys think? just the before. Control-Shift-P, format document, save the file again. So in here we have the tenant ID, application ID, grabs the client secret. It creates the authority for us. There's the tenant ID and use the V2 endpoint. And then it will we'll get the scopes. Right now we don't have any scopes here. It adds the scopes there. Again, it's a little bit verbose. We could cut a few lines of code, but technically the code that is important to us is the client, the confidential client app builder that takes the authority and the client secret. You know, you can replace that with certificate if you want to. You can also say that you're using B2C instead of B2C authority if you want to use B2C, although B2C doesn't have graph, so it will be useless. But it could be calling your own APIs, right? Here, and then there should be one more component, the graph service client. Okay, let's add that method as well. Control-Shift-Alt-A. Okay, save again. And in the main now, we just need to tie it all together, almost. So first we need to retrieve our app config settings. So this is what we're doing here, and if it fails, we'll say you couldn't find the file, something else failed. Add the following code to the end of main method. Get the client. And then we need to write a little bit more code to go and retrieve the data that we want. Save that. Control-K, Control-F. Thank you. Okay, so next following that. Okay, so they didn't tell us where it's going to get the target user ID. So unless I missed that, target, Control-F, target user ID. Haha. There's an omission. So for that to work, we need to use a graph. So if you have the graph explorer like we had before, the target user ID is the object ID, and that's the one. Yep, I am on VS Code. You're absolutely right, Bolt. Thank you very much. So unfortunately, they don't tell you how to get the target user ID, but remember how we found that information before? It was via the Graph Explorer. So if you can all head out to aka.ms, GE, and make sure you sign in with your current tenant that you have configured your app against, the app registration, and then you call the me method or the me endpoint. Your ID will be down here. So let's copy that. Let's add it to the app settings.json because that's where it's expected to be. And I think that's all we need. .NET Run. Replace the target user with the user's, oh, it tells us where to find it. Obtain the user. Okay, sorry. I said a bad word for the workshop. I forgot that I had this section here. Object ID is down there. Or you can use the graph. Yeah, see, now I have two ways to find it. Okay, let's see, ls and .NET build, just in case we mistype something or missed a reference. All good. .NET run. And it's running. Invalid app settings.json file. I think I know why. Because it's not copied across to the outputs. So it's not in the bin. And there's a CSProj configuration that you can do that to ensure that it's always copied. In VS Code, you can type, right-click the file and make it happen. What? What am I doing wrong? Apps. Ah, obviously. Ha. It's a user error. You guys are not paying attention. This was such a hack way to do it. Yeah, man. Although I think it was just me mistyping it because I think we're referencing at the right level. So let me just check the CSProj file, how we get it. Config. Yeah, it's actually using the current directory for it, but let's see how that goes. Yeah, okay. So I fixed the mistyping there, and hopefully that's all we need. With 8 minutes to spare. Well, it's definitely taking longer, so let's see what happens now. Oh, snap! Not found. The request user ID is invalid. I suspect it's because I copied the wrong thing. So let's go into my Azure ID tenant and find the right thing, although I am surprised. So the requested user, which is the one I copied from down here. You know what? It could be because it's not the object ID, and I've just copied the user ID. So that's my bad. Let's go into the way that the workshop suggested. So if I come here and if I go into my Azure Active Directory users, and I can find me, my object ID is very different. There you go. And now, if I come back here, let's go to the app settings, fix that ID there. And save and run again. That should all be it. But you know what? We made progress. Every error mistake takes us closer to where we need to be. .NET Run. Pam, pam, pam. Way, we got it. It's all working. Kaboom. And let's do the trivia at the end, and we're all done. Any questions while we're doing that? I think that went fairly well. There you go. Summary. Test your knowledge. Which of the following way isn't a valid authentication option for an app using the OAuth 2 client credential flow? Include the client ID and certificate assigned to the app within the Azure AD management portal. Include the client ID as well the user's account credentials that acts as a service account. Include the client ID and a client password assigned to the app within the Azure AD management portal. Obviously the user's account, there's no user account here. There is just a client ID and a client secret, or a client ID and a client certificate for the app registration. With minimal scopes, must a daemon or service app include in the access? Oh, what minimal scopes must a daemon or service app include in the access token request to Azure AD? A single scope of the resource followed by default. Every scope added within the Azure AD admin center for the registered app, and nothing because the permissions were statically specified in the app. In the Azure AD admin center, daemon apps don't need to include specific permissions in the access token requests. The defaults. And we passed, and that takes us at the top of the hour. We have 5 minutes for questions if you want. Now, I want to make sure that the people that have been following all along have a way to reach out to us. So at the very top of the stream, we have the Discord channel, so you can join us there. It's the best way to reach out to us. We're also very active on Twitter. So at Christos Matskas, which is right under myself. You can find my Twitter handle. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to smash the follow button or subscribe button and follow us, because we do have weekly episodes that go out twice weekly. In fact, we'll have a third episode going out as well with IT pros, our friends from the IT pro team. We're going to be talking to them tomorrow. So anything that has to do with identity, you can find on our YouTube channel. And there you can also find our blogs and announcements and what have you. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know if oh yeah, we have Rebecca, so let me just switch back to Rebecca. Sorry, Rebecca, I told you I went back. Let me see, we want to go here. There you go. I'm a pro now. I have my Stream Deck working. Back to you, Rebecca.
Hi. Oh, okay. I dropped into the chat
Oh yes,
a link to our survey.
Correct. Yes.
So if anybody has the time, you want to give us some feedback, the Reactor uses your feedback to further develop our content for the future. So definitely feel free to fill that out. We'd love it. And I shared with you the links to microsoftreactor.com, which has all of our calendars. We're an international program. We have events running at different time zones depending on where you're located, so definitely check it out there. We also are on meetup.com. We have 12 locations there. I shared the link for that as well. Find your local time zone also. And we have a newsletter. So once you're at our website, you have the option to sign up, and we'll just spam you once a month with upcoming events for the following month. So definitely check that out. I think, Christos, thank you so much for doing this again. This was a great second session. So we're going to be here again next week, same time, same place, for the next round of this module.
Exactamente. So. We look forward to seeing you all, friends. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week or tomorrow. You can join us tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.